Good morning, welcome to Chassidus in the AM, the show where we fuse Torah, Chassidus learning with music, Simcha with Torah, and the show where I call it Chassidus in the AM, but I very rarely get to actually recording it in the AM, although this is pretty much as close as I've come this week, but maybe wherever you are in the world, you're hearing it, it's the morning and it's fresh, and it's gonna help you kick off your day right. I wanted to say that this is going to be a very Gavaldic, deep Torah from the Alter Rebbe, where he's going to, kind of put away all the myths and questions, and he's going to tell us, as we're going to see in the Torah, that Yitzchak Avinu knew exactly who Esav was and what he was up to. Yitzchak Avinu was nobody's fool. He was a big tzaddik in Ruach HaKodesh, but we're going to see that his whole intention was to bring light, to bring bracha, to bring a tikkun into the darkness of where Esav was holding, and we're going to have sort of a whole spiritual, Kabbalistic backdrop to all of that. So buckle in. It's going to be a good ride, and before we jump into it, here's some Moshev band. Getting into some Shabbos vibes, we've got Lechadoidi by the Moshev band. Check out the link for the full song in the description. Here we go, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, and we're back. So this is just generally a very fundamental question that we have about the Parsha. Why did Yitzchak love Esav? What did he know? What didn't he know? What was he doing? What was the whole inyan of the brachas? What's going on behind the scenes here? Because it is, quite mysterious that Yitzchak should be, even though the Parsha starts, this section of the Parsha starts with telling us that Yitzchak had lost his vision, which seems to imply that, which seems to imply that he, kind of, I guess if you were looking at it symbolically, that he kind of wasn't seeing everything that was going on around him, and therefore he was more susceptible to Esav's trickery, perhaps. But as we're going to see from the Torah of the Rebbe, Yitzchak is not a regular person. Yitzchak has had a sagas in all of the, in so many spiritual worlds, higher worlds. He was an Oila Tmima. It's impossible to even imagine the spiritual level that Yitzchak Avinu was on. So obviously this demands a deeper explanation. And just as a preface, I sort of want to I want to just give a warning that there's this parsha gets a little bit Kabbalistic. Sorry, this Torah from the Alter Rebbe, from the Baal Tanya and Torah gets a little Kabbalistic, and Kabbalism is not my forte, as it were. I tend to say as it were a lot, but I'm going to do my best, and we're going to pull through it, and we're going to understand. We're going to get to the application to the parsha pretty soon. It's not so long, so here we go. Let's dive in. So this is, see that the reich, that the scent on my son is like the scent of a field that Hashem blessed. And here we're going to start with the questions. We have to understand, Yitzchak Avinu knew exactly who Esav was. How was Esav so chashuv in his eyes? Question number one. Question number two. Gam be'emes eina muvan ech haya Esav be'enei Yitzchak. How it's not really understood, and a deeper, even more difficult. We don't understand how exactly did Yitzchak see Esav? Kipam amar hakasuv kitzayid befiv. Because on one hand we have a pasuk that says that we have a pasuk that says kitzayid befiv, and Rashi I think brings there the famous medrash that tzayid befiv means that Esav would trick Yitzchak Avinu with all these questions. He would come to him with questions about complicated halachic issues, Maisrin and Tevin, and this was the tzayid. This was like the trap that he put in his mouth, because he would say words that would entrap Yitzchak to think that he was a tzaddik. So that's what it says on the one hand. We have that source. Upam amar kasuv hakol kol Yaakov v'hainu levi she'amar ki yekireh Hashem Elokecha v'chulei v'yadash Esav ein shem shamayim shagar b'fiv. So on the famous pasuk where it says hakol kol Yaakov v'yadayim yedei Esav, it says there that how did Yitzchak Avinu know that it was Yaakov? Because it says because Yaakov said the Shem Hashem, and he knew that Shem Shamayim was Shagor b'fiv shel Yaakov Avinu, and Esav never talked like that about Hashem. So you see that what's implied there is that again Yitzchak Avinu knew exactly who Esav was on the one hand, but on the one hand he thought he was like kitzayid b'fiv. So on the one hand he thought he maybe he had some netiyyah to kedusha because he would ask him all these questions about halacha, but on the other hand he knew very well that Esav Avinu wouldn't talk about Hashem. And so he knew that he wasn't on that level. So there seems to be a contradiction there in itself. A, why was Esav chashuv in his eyes? And B, was he really chashuv in his eyes? I mean, if Yitzchak Avinu knew that he wouldn't talk about Hashem, he wouldn't talk in a way that was mentioning Hashem a lot. So obviously he wasn't on Yitzchak knew that he wasn't on a high level, and yet he was still chashuv in his eyes. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Achayinyan. Kihine Esav susfisa de dahava psalis agvur de Yitzchak shebechinas mailas azav al kesev umipsalit shelo yetza Esav. For Eshav de Esav ba'atfui de Yitzchak, right? So basically, what it says here is that Esav is the sort of the leftovers susfisa de dahava, which is the leftovers of gvura. It represents we have this midah of gvura, of strength, of severity. Yitzchak was the zahav ala kesef. He was we're calling here gvura. The midah of gvura is comparable to zahav, to gold. Yitzchak was the real deal, the gold that it has an advantage over silver. When we psalit shelo, and from his sort of like leftovers, or from the chaff of that's a term that's related to crops, but that same inyan of when you're smelting gold or something, you have like leftover crumbs that are dirty or not as pure, and they just fall off and we don't use them. That's like the psoilus here. That's the psoilus of gvura, and that's what Esav comes from. And v'reisha de Esav ba'atfui Yitzchak, and that's represented by the head of Esav, right? That's somehow wrapped in within Yitzchak, because we know that there's a famous medrash that the head of Esav is actually buried in Maras Machpelah. And again, the head. So the head of Esav is somehow this like level that's connected, that's wrapped up, level of gvura that's wrapped up in Yitzchak. We'll have in inyan reisha, but how do we understand this concept that the psoilus of gvura is connected to the rosh of Esav? So here we go. Hine yesh yud aleph simanane haktoyres hatzar v'ziparon. There's 11 spices or herbs in the ktoiris, in the incense offering. V'hem keneged yud katrin d'mesavusa shu achius shebekdusha hamechaya es ze lumat ze. And the 11 spices in the incense offering are sort of counterpoint to the 11 forces of impurity that oppose impurity. As we say, Zelu Matzeh, Kodesh Baruch Hu makes everything Kedushi, makes in Tuma. Eser Sfiros, Sheyesh B'Kedusha Eser Sfiros, Kach Yesh Mamash B'Klipa, because it explains that we have 10 holy spheres, And we also have 10 forces of Klipa. But the forces of Klipa, paradoxically, get their illumination and their strength originally from the 10 spheres of Kedusha. We're going to keep on, one or two more lines, then we're going to have a musical break. Ach beKedusha eser, v'lo teisha v'lo yud aleph. But in Kedusha, we only have 10. We don't have 9 and we don't have 11. Uve hu yud aleph simanei aktoris. But Klipa, there's 11, which again, the simanei aktoris, the different herbs and spices in the incense offering are keneged those 11 forces of impurity that are found in Klipa. So what's the 11? If we have 10 holy powers, why don't we have 10 impure powers? They derive their strength. The impure powers derive their strength from the holy ones. So what's this extra one? So what's going on? V'ha'inyan ki al yedei achius shenimshach b'kedusha hineksiv v'tzva shamayim lecha mishtachavim. About the holy chayos. Chayos, I think here is talking about the angels. So the holy forces that come from Kedusha, it talks about them they bow down to Hashem, that they're batal to Hashem. They have a self-nullification. Why? Because they have a grasp of the life force that's being drawn down to them from Hashem Yisbarach. So that's a defining characteristic of holy forces, is they're very strong, they're very powerful, and yet they have a hasaga of elikus, an understanding, an openness to the fact that all their life force comes from the one living God. However, the klipos, the impure forces, him magbim es atzman kenesher, they lift themselves up like an eagle, they make themselves proud and haughty. The chutzpah, since the chiyus that comes to them is on the level of besoid galus, that it's hidden from them, it comes in a way that's in a way of exile, of galus. So therefore they don't perceive that their light comes from Hashem, and so they get but they're super, super strong, so they get very, very arrogant, and they lift themselves up, and they don't have an asaga of where their life force comes from. And the chayas that is drawn down to them gets swallowed up within them, and they have no concept of bittul, of self-nullification to the one above. And now we're going to take a short musical break, guys, with some more Moshe band. I think with this time we're going to go with some Mizmor LeDavid, and we'll be right back with an explanation of how all this has to do with Esav. Okay, we are back. Hope you enjoyed that Moshe band. Classic stuff. I love the Moshe band. Sometimes I'm like looking for things to listen to and I forget about them just because they've been around for so long, since my teens basically. But they really have always done such a good job of making high quality Jewish soulful music and just incredible voices and harmony and melodies. And their Shabbos album is lahit, as they say. But I digress. We're talking about the forces of impurity, the 10 forces of impurity that swallow up the light of Kedusha, because basically what we said is they just take from the Eser spheres of Kedusha, and because they don't have any transparency or translucency to that light, they're not bottled to the light like the 10 spheres of Kedusha are. So then they just take and take and take, and they don't give out anything, and you can't live like that. And basically the 10 forces that enliven them get swallowed up in them. And so the Alter Rebbe asks if this is true, that they're nivla, that the 10 koiches of Kedusha are nivla, and the 10 koiches of Tuma, which by the way makes me think of Yosef's dream, but that's another digression. If they get swallowed up in them, well then how can they give them life? They basically become, like the forces of Kedusha basically become batal to the forces of Tuma, chas v'shalom. So I don't really understand this in its completion, but the Alter Rebbe explains that's where we come in with the 11th force. Remember we said the 11 simamene, the 11 herbs and spices in the Ketairis and the incense offering are connected the 11 forces of Tuma. So what is this 11th level? We're going to explain this 11th level is a makiv, as a surrounding light that doesn't get nivla, doesn't get swallowed up within the forces of impurity. And this 11th force, which is basically an intermediary between the 10 koiches of Kedusha and the 10 spheres of Kedusha and the 10 spheres of Tuma, this is what gives them life. And because it's a makiv, because it's something that's transcendent, it does not get swallowed up. And this 11th level corresponds to, drumroll, Reisha de Esav, the head of Esav. How can they be enlivened from holiness? This holiness gets swallowed in the 10 koiches of Tuma. Levaina is this 11th Levaina, which is connected to the word of Bina, which Bina is definitely a makif. It represents like the womb that surrounds the child, and it's Bina is also on the side of Gvura. Shehu or makif alehem milamayla ve'eno nivla b'seicham. So this Levaina, this 11th spice, or as it were, this 11th energy, just stays around them. It remains transcendent from the 10 forces of Tumah, and it doesn't get swallowed within them. Levishu or amakiv milamayla min hadas shelahem ve'inam margishim boy v'achayus shenimshach lehem v'pnimius nivla kanal v'fichachem isgoyim magmim esatzmam b'chutz b'kanal. However, this force, it doesn't get swallowed up with them, but it's a makiv, so they never actually perceive it. All they perceive is the strength that's coming within them. They don't know where it's coming from. So therefore they get really proud and haughty, these 10 forces of Tumah, and they lift themselves up with a chutzpah. So as we said, this 11th level, this is which on the side of Kedusha is called Levaina. Right, Levaina, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me in the comments, but Levaina is the spice that didn't smell good. Dafka, I know that there's one spice in the 11 in the Simam Nektaris that Dafka smells really bad, but it has to be in there. I think it's Levaina. So we said this Levaina is the intermediary, as we said, between the 10 forces of Kedusha and the 10 forces of Tuma, Eser Spheres and Eser Spheres. And this is Reisha de Esav, the Hainu B'chinas HaMakiv Milamayla, Hu Nichlal Ba'atvu Di Yitzchak. So it's the aspect of Esav, which is transcending from on high, and actually the Makif of Esav, as we said, the Reisha de Esav, as we also said, is the psoilis of the gold of Yitzchak's true gold of Gvura, right? And it's Nichlal, and it's actually, there's a certain, right, in Kabbalah, like the Makif of something is the Pnimi of the higher level. So it's a Makif to the Eser Spheres of Kedusha, it's a Makif to the Eser Spheres of Tuma. However, it's a malchus, it's nichlal in something else. And what's a nichlal? And it's nichlal in the energy of Yitzchak and the gvur of Kedusha. Mamish. V'lachein, mitzad b'chinas ha-makif Esav, sho'el ech me'asrin esatev, and mitzad ha-pnimius, ein shem shamayim shagar b'fiv. So this is where how the contradiction gets resolved. Remember, we asked what's the confusion, right? On the one hand, he seems to be tricking Yitzchak and giving him like all these shilas in halacha. On the other hand, he doesn't talk about Hashem, and Yitzchak knew about this contradiction. So how did he really view him? So Yitzchak understood that on the side of his makif level, the way he was on the transcendent level, Esav is really holding by this place of that he's asking, and he's concerned about halacha. It's really on the makif is nichlal b'toich, the energy of kedusha of Yitzchak. But he has this whole other level of the pnimius of Esav, which again represents the head of Esav, which ended up getting also buried in Maras Machpelah. The pnimius of Esav is in Shem Shemai Shaber, but Befiv really inside is rotten. Vihine, a little bit more here. And now we're going to see what Yitzchak. So Yitzchak knew about this tension within Esav, that there's obviously a lot of potential here, but that the way it was manifesting in the world was really dark. And we're going to see that Yitzchak, through how he wanted to deal with it. V'hinei noida ki achayis beser kasim savusa hu mipnei ki chayil bala avi ka'enu ves ezer shalat adam ba'adam lara loy v'hu mipnei hanitzoises shenaflu behem b'schilas b'riyas ha'olam b'shviras ha'kelim v'yumlach v'yamos v'chulei. This is complicated stuff here, but basically we know that the 10 crowns of impurity is because of what chayil bala v'kienu ves ezer shalat adam ba'adam lara loy. It's connected. Basically, it's connected to the union of Shviras HaKelim. The sparks that fell into it at the beginning of the creation of the world, B'Shviras HaKelim, in a way that the vessels were, excuse me, that the vessels were broken. And also it's connected to the Chet Adam Harishon. Pashagosov is B'Sefer Al Gigulim, another, definitely a book that I'm not holding in. And that's why all this life force is getting drawn into them in the aspect of the secret of exile, right? It's an exiled energy. That really we go into exile in order to recollect all these sparks that were lost in Shviras HaKelim and Chet Adam Harishon. Reish Mem v'unklush u'shme'ina v'avtlion v'uvadia b'hem. Oh, so he's talking about all these great holy neshamas, these nitzaitzas, these sparks that came out of the line of Esa. We have Rabbi Meir and we have Unklus v'shma'in v'shamin v'avtalion, all these tzaddikim v'uvadia and even Nevi'im u'mehem hayat tzayid b'fiv. But they come from the level of tzayid b'fiv, right? Of the level of that makif level of Esav, that transcendent level of Esav. And Yitzchak wanted to draw out the Kedusha from Esav by himself. Not through Yaakov. He wanted to do the avodah of Yaakov by himself. Avdu Zakin Beisol Alois Misham Laver Kanal. Really, so Yaakov is this level of Zah the Kedusha, of the Zer Anpin the Kedusha, that all the lights above it become incorporated within, and it's on the aspect of the work of Chol, meaning Yitzchak had the true potential. We're running really past time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Yaakov had the true potential to be Mevarer Esav ultimately, but Yitzchak Avinu didn't perceive that. That was his mistake. His mistake wasn't about the identity of Esav. His mistake was about the identity of who Yaakov was and how that was going to play out. He was just trying to draw, by giving him the bracha, which the Alter Rebbe explains in the final parts of the mimer here, is that the brachas represent all these spiritual things. They represent the chokhmah of Torah and the supernal chokhmah of Hashem that he wanted to draw down into Esav in order to be able to draw also his pnimius. Also, Esav's pnimius is the internalness of his being over to Kedusha. But that was his mistake. His mistake was that was really what Yaakov was meant to do. That their struggle would ultimately, the struggle between Yaakov and Esav would ultimately result in bringing that about, in bringing the side of the pnimius of Esav also into the side of Kedusha. But it was obviously a lengthy process. But Yitzchak was trying to forego that. So I don't know. I just thought it was a fascinating Torah. We see that how much was going on spiritually behind the background, and how much Yitzchak knew. Obviously, he knew that Yaakov was a tzaddik, but there's something very special about the process. That perhaps Yitzchak, being this totally gvura personality, he was looking at the situation from above to below. he had his perspective on it. From above to below, he was 100% right. Esav had the potential right then and there to be schlepped out. But from the other perspective, from Milamata Lamaila, which is where Yaakov was holding a balance of chesed and gvura with tiferes, a complete, like, holistic vision of reality, Yaakov was the one that was meant to, through the process of Torah and mitzvahs, through engaging with darkness, but always turning it around into light, through working the aspect of working the 6 days of the week into Shabbos, because there's their Anpin is 6 forces. That's ultimately was going to lead to the birur, to the uplifting and the purifying of the energy of Esav. So good Shabbos, good Shabbos. I'm not going to have a shir tomorrow. Sorry for the length of this one. We're going to play this out with a little bit more Moshe then.